About this time every year, I reevaluate my kids' morning and evening checklists. The reason that I revisit the checklists about once a year is because I want to make sure that the routines are still working. I want to make sure everything is flowing well and that all of the routines and the order of all the things makes sense. And one of my goals for my kids is that by the time they leave my home, they have been exposed to every area of home management so that they can easily run their own homes. And one way that I am trying to make this happen is by reevaluating the chores once a year and giving them a little upgrade in their responsibilities. So we did this probably a couple of months ago now, and the girls have been learning their new chore routines, and we have been making sure that everything is going smoothly, everything is in the right order, and everything is age appropriate for where they are at now. But as I was getting ready to film this updated chore routine video, I started to get questions from several moms about how to implement chores for the first time in such a way that you won't have to keep micromanaging the children and the chores long term. And I realized that I had never done a full video about all of the steps that you need to take when you implement chores for the first time. So instead of just jumping in and looking at the updated chore routines, first I want to talk about some really common mistakes that parents make when it comes to chores and tell you some steps that you can take instead to set yourself up for success. If you're new here, I'm Kassy, and my goal is to help you get 7 extra hours in your week by simplifying and streamlining your home. So if that sounds like something you would like to see more of, please subscribe down below and ring the bell next to the subscribe button so you can be notified when the next video comes out. All right, let's get into the 11 mistakes parents make when it comes to assigning chores and what you should be doing instead. This first mistake is the most important one not to make, and I think it's the one that parents make most often. Let me know in the comments down below which of these mistakes you think you have made most often, and I'll be really interested to see which one of these gets the most votes. But the first mistake that you definitely don't want to make is not having your own routines figured out before you implement a chore routine. Parents often get really gung-ho about chores. It's really exciting to think about offloading some of our responsibilities to another able-bodied person, right? So who wouldn't want to assign chores to their children? But the problem is if you go around assigning chores and just giving away all of these responsibilities before you have all of your routines figured out, it is going to lead to problems. The reason this leads to problems is because when you have your routines and systems in place, it is much easier to teach someone else how to do things. You can teach them the proper way to do the laundry, you can teach them the proper way to clean the kitchen, the bathrooms, and anything else that you need done in your house. Another reason this is so important is because if you don't have your routines in place, if everything is crazy around your house and it isn't streamlined at all, you are going to be juggling so many different things that you aren't going to be able to dedicate the time and mental energy into effectively and patiently teaching your kids how to do their chores. So it is very important that you have all of your ducks in a row before you try to get someone else's ducks in a row. So if you feel like this is a mistake you might be making, I will put in the cards and in the description down below a series that I did on how to easily manage your home. And if you watch through that series and follow along and do the routines that I talk about in that series, it will walk you through exactly how to put those routines in place so that you can be ready to get your kids doing chores. So mistake number 1 is not having your own things in order first, and what to do instead is to get your routines in place, and I would even say get some of your decluttering done before you start teaching your kids chores. Now you may be thinking, well, getting decluttering done is a whole nother animal and that is going to take a lot of time. And it does. Decluttering is not an easy thing to do by any means. However, it is much easier for children to do things like make their beds and tidy their rooms when they have a manageable amount of stuff. Mistake number 2 that parents often make when it comes to assigning chores is they will just look at chores and assign them to certain days of the week and to whichever child they think should do the chore. Instead, what should be done is you should coordinate your weekly cleaning routine with your child's chore checklist. Now, this isn't as important if you have much older children or if your children have been doing chores for a long time. For example, my 8-year-old's chore checklist is no longer coordinated with mine because she is able to do the things I need her to do without much supervision. But when you are very first getting your kids into doing chores, you really want to be working in the same vicinity that your child is working. Especially if your child is prone to sneaking off and playing when they're supposed to be doing chores, you will be able to teach them much better how to focus if you are in the same room also working on something with them. Now, I'm not saying you need to be working on exactly the same thing, but just be in the general area. This also helps your child be more confident in the chores that they are doing because when they need to ask a question, you will be right there. They won't have to look all over the house for you. They can easily get an answer when they get stuck. And this also allows you to make minor adjustments and help them in little ways as they are doing their chore versus them doing the full chore, you coming back and saying, oh, this isn't how I wanted it done, and them having to do the whole thing over again. That process will just lead to a lot of frustration on both of your ends and will just lead to bad communication when it comes to doing chores in the future. If you are in the same area though, and you see them doing something just a little bit off, you can course correct from the very beginning and show them in little incremental improvements how you want something done. That way, when they are finished with the chore, they are actually finished with the chore and they don't have to worry about coming back and it not being good enough. And this is just another example too about why you want to have your routine set up first. Because once your cleaning routine is in place, it is really easy to coordinate that with a child's routine. The third mistake parents often make is they just start assigning chores to whomever they think would be good to do that chore, and they don't ask children what their preferences would be. What you want to do instead is you want to tell your children, hey, we are going to start doing chores in this house. Are there any that you are interested in learning how to do? Are there any chores that you definitely don't want to do? Now, I'm not saying that you never assign those chores that they would rather not do because that's part of life, right? We all have to do things that we don't want to do. But when you are very first assigning chores, it's a really good idea to just get everyone's buy-in, get everyone on the same page, and get the whole chore thing to become a habit before you work on getting into those more difficult and less desirable chores. And the nice thing is, at least in our family, this is the case. One person's most hated chore is one that somebody else would actually rather do. So it comes in really handy when you ask who would like to do what, and then everyone ends up much happier. The fourth mistake that a lot of parents make when it comes to assigning chores is they don't take into account their children's personalities. Instead, you can take some time to think about, would this child do better with more variety in their weekly routine, or would they do better with more monotony? This is definitely a mistake that I have made in the past, and I continued to make it up until the most recent update. The only reason I figured this out is because my almost 8-year-old told me. She said, Mom, I would much rather have my routine be basically the exact same every single day and just know I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this every single day. And I would rather not have a chore routine that changes every day. Whereas my younger daughter, I realized as we were talking about this, much prefers variety. She cannot stand any sort of monotony in her routine, and she doesn't even like it that every week she has the same 5 chores that she has to do during the week. Generally on Monday, when I tell her her chore, she says, I just did that last week. And I say, yep, that's kind of part of life when it comes to cleaning and doing chores. You do something once and then you have to keep doing it again. So I took this into account this time, and they have been working much better with getting the girls internally motivated to do their chores. Especially with the older one, once we figured out that she prefers that monotony and just likes doing the same thing day after day, I rarely have to remind her for any step of her checklist because she just knows what it is and she just goes into autopilot for it and she loves it. So if you aren't sure what your children would prefer, ask them. Ask them, would you much rather do the exact same thing all 5 days of the week, or would you rather your daily chore rotate to 5 different things? The fifth mistake that a lot of parents make when it comes to doing chores is they will just write out a list of chores and tell their kids, do these every day. The only problem with this is that you're dealing with kids, and kids are notoriously bad at time management. So instead, what you want to do is you want to create a chore routine that is built into some other part of their day. I recommend building in their chores to their morning routine, but this works well for us because we are homeschooled. We don't have to get out of the house at a specific time every single morning. If your children leave early in the day for school, I recommend building it into their evening routine or their after-school routine. What you're going for here is for the chores to be a natural part of the day that just happens without your intervention. And incorporating the chores into a routine that is already existing or that will be existing once you build the routine, it just naturally creates a habit. Even if it takes a little bit of time to gain that momentum, eventually it will be automatic. The sixth mistake that a lot of parents make is they try to get all of their children to start doing chores at one time. Instead, what you want to do is teach one child how to do their chore routine at a time. Then once that child understands the routine and is able to do it, you move on to the next child, and then the next, and then the next. But you're never working with more than one child and teaching more than one child a routine at a time. Now, for my kids, I don't have to do this anymore because we have been doing these routines for so long. They know the basic routine, and it's really just a matter of switching in and out chores, which especially the 8-year-old can really do without much help. The 5-year-old still needs a little bit of help here and there, especially when she's learning the routine because she can't read yet. But it's not a huge production for me to teach them every time. So this is really just for the first time. And then once you get past this initial period where you are teaching everyone how these routines work, it should be much easier to switch out their chores whenever you need to. The seventh mistake that a lot of parents make with chores is they don't talk about the chores unless the chores need to be done. Instead, what you want to do is, as you are teaching each child, every night before they go to bed, go over the checklist with them. At first, this will be reading it to them, showing them how to mark off the checklist. You can show them which day will be tomorrow. Is it Monday? It goes in this column. Tuesday goes in this column. Show them how they can make the checks and go through the whole checklist with them. Once it has been a few days and they are starting to get the hang of it, ask them, what is the first thing that you are going to do in the morning? And they will tell you. And then you say, yes, that's correct. What is the next thing? And you walk through the whole checklist with them this way. And eventually, when you ask them what they are going to do in the morning, they will be able to tell you the checklist from memory. Now, you may run into something here that we have in the past where when the kids are starting to figure out the checklist and you say, what are you going to do in the morning? They will kind of sigh, Mom, I know what to do in my checklist. Then what I say to my kids in that situation is, great, prove it to me. Tomorrow, I want you to show me that you can do the entire thing without me having to say anything about it. And if you can do that, and as long as you do that, I won't review it with you anymore. And then they can show me the next day if they actually do know their checklist. And if they don't, then we go back to reviewing until they can show me that they have it down. Now, you can also do this for the evening checklists. At dinner time, you can say, okay, what is the first thing that you are going to do after dinner? And then what is the next thing? And same thing, you just walk them through the steps. And this is just familiarizing them with the checklist in a situation where they aren't in the middle of it. So they aren't frustrated about having to do it at that point, and it's just solidifying all of those steps in their head. But remember, this is still just with the one child that you are working with for that time. As you move on to the next child, you will then begin going over their checklist with them. The eighth mistake a lot of parents make when it comes to chores is expecting that the learning process will be quick. In reality, it can take a little bit of time before these routines become a habit. I recommend for probably at least 2 weeks when you first start this routine to be there with your child as they are going through each and every step. Sit with them and say, okay, what is on this first line? All right, let's do it. And You want to be careful to not do it with them, but you're there if they need any help or any guidance along the way. Obviously, depending on the age, if they're 3 and maybe even 4, they may need some help learning how to make their bed or things like that. But for older kids, it's really important to let them do it, even if you have to maybe show them 1 or 2 times. You want to make sure they are learning how to do it and you aren't just doing their chores for them. Then once they do every step of their checklist, show them how to mark it off and how to go to the next line. So just know that you're going to need to invest some time up front, and it will make your life easier down the road. And also keep in mind that you're going to need to invest this time for each child that you teach. The 9th mistake a lot of parents make when it comes to chores is not teaching their children to move quickly. I definitely made this mistake for a while, and then this last time when we were updating those checklists, I came up with something that has worked very well for the almost 8-year-old. Next to each item on her checklist, I put an approximate amount of time that each task should take, and I was generous with the time. I didn't want to make it too hard for her, but I did want to push her a little bit to working a little faster. She tends to be somebody who can be very thorough and take quite a while doing every step of her checklist, and she doesn't really mind, especially if someone else is around to chat with. But I wanted to teach her to really focus and to move with purpose. I actually put both of those phrases on her checklist to remind her that that is what she's working on. And when I put those approximate times on every single section of her checklist, especially in the morning checklist, since that was more of a problem, all of a sudden she started moving much more quickly because she had a watch and the watch had a stopwatch on it. So she would set the stopwatch and then she would try to beat whatever time I had set on her checklist. And she was often telling me, "Mom, you put 5 minutes on here, but it only took me 2.5." And she was very excited about it whenever she could beat my time, which was very often as soon as she figured out how to do everything. Because like I said, I was generous with the time and I wanted to make it doable. Now for the 5-year-old, she doesn't really understand time yet, so this isn't as helpful for her. Now, even for kids who don't fully understand the concept of time, like my younger one, it is still a good idea to give them a time limit on getting every single thing done. So for both of my kids, they have a time limit of 10 a.m. if they want to get a bonus. And that leads me to mistake number 10 that a lot of parents make. They don't have any sort of incentive for the kids to get their checklists done or to get the chores done. So often I will hear parents say things like, "We have chores set up, but nobody does them." And if that is where you are and your children are plenty old enough and they understand how it all works and they should be doing their chores, it may be because you don't have any rewards in place. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to suggest that you pay your children for helping out around the house. I don't think that children need money for doing basic chores that keep the home running. In our house, we do have chores that they can get paid for, but those are chores that are above and beyond. They have to have their daily checklist done to even do any of them. And the types of chores that they can do are things like cleaning all the blinds, washing windows, cleaning the window tracks, cleaning all the door handles in the house, deep cleaning the kitchen. So they're things that aren't just little daily tasks. They are bigger things that need to be done every once in a while, and they aren't things that need to be done in order for the house to run smoothly. So if you aren't paying them money, how do you give them an incentive? Well, we do something in our house we call bonuses. And if the girls get up and they get all of their stuff done without me having to remind them by 10 a.m., they can have a bonus for the morning checklist. Now, the bonuses aren't anything wild or crazy. They're actually a lot of things that we would love to do with our kids anyway. But if they spend their whole day on their checklists, we don't have time to do any of these more fun things. So the idea with the bonus is to, again, show them if you get your things done quickly and efficiently and right away, you have much more time in the day to do things that you would enjoy. So some of the bonus ideas that we use are getting a piece of gum. Our kids aren't allowed to ask for gum anytime. We will offer it to them sometimes, but it's not a daily thing unless they get a bonus. Then they can have a piece of gum. Another bonus that our kids love is being able to skip a nap and do a quiet time instead. Now, some days if they are really tired, if we had a late night the night before, or if we have something going on that night and I want them to be rested, I will let them know, hey, we can't do a quiet time today. You do need to take a nap. But here are your other options. But whenever they are eligible to do a quiet time, that is usually what they choose. Another bonus that they love to do is staying up 15 minutes later at bedtime. That's a very popular evening bonus option. Another option they have is 15 minutes with just them and mommy or daddy. So with just one parent and the one child who is getting the bonus. And this is a favorite of my middle daughter. She really likes the one-on-one time, and she will usually choose to do it with me. She likes to paint her nails when we do this, or read a story, or sometimes she chooses to go to the park with my husband or something like that. But she really enjoys that one-on-one time, so that's one of her favorite bonuses to do. Another one we will do is playing a game as a family or reading an extra story at bedtime. So these are not crazy, they aren't expensive, they aren't things that are going to take a ton of extra time, but when they are doing their checklists and they're being helpful and we are all getting things done right away, we love doing these extra things with them that we wouldn't have time to do otherwise. And the 11th mistake that a lot of parents make is not having consequences for when the chores don't get done. Yes, having the rewards is really nice, and incentives work really well for a lot of children most of the time. But even as well as they work for my kids, there are still times when they will look at each other and say, let's just not get a bonus today, and they will play instead of doing their checklist. Well, obviously, that is not what I want to be communicating. So we do have in place consequences if they don't get their checklists done. Now, they don't get a consequence if they don't hit the time limit. So let's say they get their checklist done by 11 instead of 10. They just don't get the bonus, but there's no consequence for that. What they get a consequence for is if they are playing or doing other things when they're supposed to be doing their checklists. And the consequences for them at this point are generally just things like missing out. So both of our girls are in music lessons, and they each like to go to the other one's music lesson. Well, the rule for that day is if you don't get your checklist done, you have to stay home for your sister's music lesson. And this can be really disappointing, especially for the younger one. She loves going to her sister's lesson. And it's a big disappointment for her if she has to stay home with daddy while I take her sister. So just little things like that, missing out, going to bed early is another one. I will often tell them, hey, if you're too tired to get your checklist done, that just means you need extra rest. So you're gonna have to go to bed 30 minutes before your siblings tonight. And that again is a huge bummer when that happens. So it usually doesn't take too many nights of doing that before they get their acts together and start doing their checklists again. So I did want to show you guys the updated checklists, but I feel like I have been filming for a really long time and this is probably going to be a long video. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a part 2 that will come out next week, and I will show you our updated checklists then. To make sure you see when that video comes out, be sure to subscribe down below and ring the bell next to it. And if you found this video helpful, please like it because that helps even more people see this content. I would love to hear in the comments down below which of these mistakes you have made as a parent, and please let me know also if there are any mistakes that you have made that I left off my list. As always, I'm Kassy, and I love making videos about how you can simplify your life so you can get some much needed time for yourself.